counties of this country.
We're going to leave at this point of the program to take you live to a hearing on risks posed by foreign nationals working at the Energy Department's national laboratories. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee is holding this hearing. We're waiting for a hearing on risks posed by foreign nationals working at the Energy Department's national laboratories. It's expected to begin shortly. The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee is holding this hearing.
The Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee's hearing on research security risks posed by foreign nationals from countries of risk working at the Department of Energy's national laboratories and necessary mitigation steps. I'll give my 5-minute opening statement here in a moment, then I'll turn to Ranking Member Heinrich for his opening statement. Then I'll introduce witnesses and give them an opportunity to give their 5-minute opening statements. The U.S. Department of Energy oversees 17 national labs. These labs have been instrumental in shaping America's technological and military competitive edge. From the Manhattan Project to cutting-edge AI research, DOE's national labs have pushed the boundaries of innovation and strengthened our national security. But for those very same reasons, they've also become a prime target for espionage. Secretary Chris Wright, at his confirmation hearing just a few weeks ago, said, "We must protect and accelerate the work of the DOE labs to secure America's competitive advantage and security," close quote. I could not agree more, and that's precisely why we're here today at this hearing, to explore ways that we can secure American technology for the benefit of our economic and national security. For years, the Chinese Communist Party has worked to infiltrate our national labs, targeting top scientists and siphoning off American research to fuel China's military ambitions. Through programs like the Thousand Talents program, the CCP systematically recruited elite scientists, nationals of the People's Republic of China, who were trained in the West, built their careers in American labs, and worked with American funding to develop American technology. And then the CCP lured them back to China. It's a deliberate strategy to leverage U.S. taxpayer-funded expertise for the benefit of the Chinese military. And tragically, we're starting to see the consequences. Former DOE researchers are helping China develop hypersonic missiles, deep earth penetrating warheads, and advanced submarines. These are weapons designed to outmatch and deter the United States. Make no mistake, Beijing is actively exploiting weak security protocols, academic collaboration loopholes, and U.S. grant programs to advance its military capabilities, all on American taxpayers' dime. During his first term, President Trump tightened DOE's security protocols at the labs. He cracked down on CCP recruitment programs and ensured accountability at the DOE for those who approved a researcher from a country of risk working on DOE projects, making it clear that our national labs wouldn't be used to strengthen the Chinese military. But President Biden loosened those restrictions, and the door is once again open at the CCP. open to the CCP, rather, which compels its citizens by law to disclose information that they might have that can benefit China's strategic goals. That is unacceptable to the United States. Congress and this administration must act immediately to close the gaps, tighten security, and ensure that American research stays in American hands. I'm looking forward to understanding how the Department of Energy under the Biden administration allowed foreign adversaries to infiltrate our most sensitive research institutions and exploring ways to ensure that this never happens again. If we fail to protect our scientific leadership, our intellectual property, and our national secrets, we don't just lose our competitive advantage. We hand it directly to our greatest geopolitical rival. So I look forward, and needless to say, to hearing from our witnesses today and learning more about this emerging problem. Now, we'll turn to Senator Heinrich for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Lee, and thank you to our expert panel of witnesses for coming to speak with us today. As ranking member of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and also a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, counterintelligence at our national labs is a matter that I believe we should all take very seriously. But first, I want to discuss another counterintelligence risk. Last week, the Trump administration laid off 1,800 DOE employees. Many of our nation's top experts in fields essential to our economic and national security, such as critical and emerging technologies and nuclear safety, were let go. These employees had top security clearances, were dismissed without following legal protocol to end those clearances. And the Trump administration is now trying to reverse course and reinstate some of these employees. But you have to ask, why would they want to go back after being treated this way? Our best experts have lost trust in the U.S. government. President Trump is doing exactly what our adversaries want. They aren't losing their best experts. We are. This is a national security threat that will have lasting impacts on our country for decades to come. I sent a letter to the President urging the administration to halt these mass firings, and I would encourage my colleagues to do the same. Turning back to the research security at our DOE national labs, this is a sensitive issue. We want to avoid telegraphing to our adversaries details on the research our labs are doing and what security protocols our national labs take to protect it. We don't want to give our adversaries a blueprint of any vulnerabilities. This is why we've always discussed this issue in a classified setting. And quite frankly, I'm disappointed to read some of the witness testimony to which we cannot appropriately respond in this open venue. But we're here today, so let's do our best to take care with how we have this discussion in a public setting. Additionally, as no one on this panel is currently at DOE or any of the national labs, I think it's important that we be briefed by DOE and its Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence about how it is implementing recently passed legislation before using this hearing or any hearing as an impetus for future legislation. Most people think about the Department of Energy for its Manhattan Project beginnings or work advancing energy technologies. But DOE does much more than just nuclear weapons and energy. The department is also the largest supporter of physical science, scientific research in the federal government, conducting research and developing technologies across a range of fields from artificial intelligence to vaccine development to astrophysics. The United States has been able to accomplish breakthroughs in space exploration, supercomputing, and the Human Genome Project because of the work at the national laboratories. We've been able to accomplish so much and be the first to do it, in part because of the counterintelligence capabilities we possess that have kept our research safe and secure. The fact that DOE's Counterintelligence Office is under the umbrella of the intelligence community is a critical asset that we must leverage and strengthen. The threat of foreign intelligence, or the threat of foreign espionage, is becoming increasingly more complex and dangerous. We need to adapt. When scientists or students from other countries want to come and partake in our world-class research, we must take a serious look at the security risks involved especially individuals from countries we've deemed a national security concern. On the one hand, we must recognize and embrace that much of America's science and technology expertise comes from abroad. Immigrants founded or co-founded nearly half of top startups in the U.S., and international students earn 60% of computer science doctorates. Between 1901 and 2023, immigrants have been awarded 36% of the Nobel Prizes won by Americans in chemistry, medicine, and physics. The Department of Energy would not exist without the contributions of Enrico Fermi and Hans Bethe, two immigrants from World War II adversarial nations, to the Manhattan Project. So we must be sure that we have strong research security safeguards in place while ensuring we can be a home to the best and brightest from around the world. Striking this balance between international cooperation in science and technology and our national security is not easy. In the CHIPS and Science Act, and more recently in the fiscal year 2025 Intelligence Authorization Act, we authorized bipartisan and balanced research security improvements for the DOE that strengthen their capabilities in this space. So I look forward to hearing about how Congress can best support DOE's efforts in safeguarding our research for the sake of our country's national security. However, as we all know, not all threats come from foreign entities. Thorough background checks are required before any individual has access to sensitive information. In the past few weeks, we have seen multiple instances of staffers from the Department of Government Efficiency, which is not a department, or DOGE, gain access to information systems throughout the federal government. We have seen instances of staff being able to access federal payment systems at the Treasury Department, as well as try to access personal details of Americans at the Social Security Administration. Jay Tilden, the head of DOE's Office of Intelligence, even had to remind staff that DOGE employees could not have access to SCIFs without a clearance. All of this is concerning. Along with my colleagues on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, I sent a letter to the White House demanding answers regarding DOGE operations and their seemingly unfettered access to sensitive information. These are unprecedented risks to our national security, and it is paramount that we address them immediately. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. It's, of course, important to remember that the President, under Article 2, is vested with the executive power. The President has the authority constitutionally and statutorily to decide who can see what within his administration. And when he designates someone as having access to it, they do have access to that. I want to thank our witnesses here today. Let me introduce each of them quickly, and then we'll turn to each of you for your opening statements. First, we have Mr. Paul DeBar. Mr. DeBar is the co-founder of Bohr Quantum Technologies and former Undersecretary of Science at the Department of Energy under the Trump administration. As Undersecretary of Science, Mr. DeBar managed the National Laboratory Complex at the Department of Energy. Next, we have Ms. Anna Puglisi. Ms. Puglisi is a fellow at the Hoover Institute, a public policy think tank housed at Stanford University. Ms. Puglisi has testified extensively on this topic we're discussing today, so we'll look forward to hearing your thoughts as well. Finally, Dr. Jerry Richmond is the former Undersecretary for Science and Innovation at the Department of Energy under the Biden administration. Dr. Richmond currently serves as the Presidential Chair in Science and is a professor of chemistry at the University of Oregon. Thanks to all three of you for your willingness to appear in front of the committee. We'll now turn to Mr. DeBar for your opening statement, then to Ms. Puglisi in order of introduction, and then to Ms. Richmond.
Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Heinrich, it's great to be in front of this committee yet again and seeing many friends here. America leads the world in discovery and innovation. No one else comes close. One can see that in the Nobel Prizes that was referenced in the introduction. Examples include nuclear power, generation of chips, fusion, AI, quantum, solar PV, electric vehicles, gene editing, and chemistry of batteries of all types. And much of that was spearheaded at the DOE National Labs. But our top adversary, China, puts tremendous pressure in appropriating this innovation and then manufacturing it. Examples include nuclear power stolen from Westinghouse, the lithium-ion battery at Cattle, the LFP batteries at BYD stolen from MIT patents, electric vehicles, solar PV, GPUs, semiconductors, and they're trying to steal the future of quantum and fusion. Let me put this into historical context. When I took over the role of undersecretary, I discovered that we had significant stealing of technology at the labs. Not only that, but our policy allowed our own researchers to legally be employed by Communist China at the same time as working at our national labs. After finding this out and going through the 5 stages of grief, I forgot from my academy days that Navy is an acronym that stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself, and I started mapping out security policy changes. We banned talent programs. We banned lab employees from working with countries of risk. We created the technology risk matrix to restrict engagement on frontier technologies. We restricted interactions with China and extended Communist China fundraising restrictions on university researchers who got DOE funding. All these felt like bringing back common sense. However, in the last several years, we have allowed that risk to increase. The Infrastructure Act funding was given to communist-controlled entities in violation of the Act. As disclosed in the report at the Homeland Security Committee, Communist Chinese nationals who were employed at DOE labs stole inventions in violation of U.S. law and took them to China for commercialization. They effectively created spy cells by recruiting new members, and they tried to recruit senior lab and former political officials. I wrote about that in the Wall Street Journal, and I submitted that as testimony. We must also remember that all PRC citizens are required by the Chinese national security law to hand over all information when directed by the Chinese state. In addition, DOE has restarted engagement with Communist China in sharing energy technologies. They have been proactively meeting with the communist government to reestablish transfer of American invention to China. And what was interesting was that this effort was never publicly identified by DOE, but many were able to find that in meetings and articles in local Chinese newspapers, including pictures. And those officials were in Communist China were hailing China technology appropriation. I do believe that there are plenty of people who think that this is important to share with Communist China for various different reasons, but I expect that the majority of the American people do not want us to turn over our technology to our adversaries, and I venture could say that this is the view of this full committee. New controls are needed for science and security, and I know that Secretary Wright is focused on that. While the current DOE orders on the DOE website provide a framework for security and counterintelligence, they provide too much flexibility and discretion for interpretation by politicals, careers, and lab employees. I recommend the new DOE team roll out significant tightened controls, such as requiring lab undersecretaries to be sole authorizer with no ability to delegate authority for all countries of risk, nationals hiring, visits by labs or meetings. And also create a list of the waivers that can be found by this committee for its oversight. The Senate should consider legislation mandating security policies that require administrative policies that politicals would have little discretion in interpreting. I've also included in my written testimony an idea for DOE to recover stolen IP. And the Senate should consider extending the NNSA lab ban on adversary nation nationals from the 3 NNSA labs to all the labs. America is the world's greatest superpower in both technology and in energy. As we invent the future, we should re-engage on strong policies to protect our discovery leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Ms. Puglisi.
Thank you, Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Heinrich, distinguished members of the committee and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing. It's an honor to be here alongside the esteemed experts on this panel. As I mentioned, I'm currently a visiting fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution and previously served as the National Counterintelligence Officer for East Asia. The views presented here, though, today are my own. My testimony will address why the DOE labs are targeted by China and then discuss research security and potential mitigation strategies. Lastly, I'll offer some lessons learned that include this is a U.S. problem, not just a Department of Energy problem. China's government has explicit efforts to exploit its diaspora. While this must be addressed and countered, the rights of persons of Chinese ethnicity in the U.S. must be protected. Finally, we can't protect what we don't have. We have to invest in the future. The U.S. science and technology research enterprise, and especially the Department of Energy labs, set the global standard for discovery and innovation. Creating a climate to safeguard science will take a mindset change. Many in the research community see current policy changes as punitive. Because of this, it's important to discuss benefits of collaboration broadly, as they are not the same across the different stakeholders. An individual researcher can benefit from a specific collaboration because it brings them additional resources, prestige, or access to data or equipment, but it might not be to the benefit of the U.S. government, national security, or the U.S. taxpayer. While China is not the only country that targets the Department of Energy labs, China's policies to target the Department of Energy complex are a deliberate state-sponsored strategy to save time and money. China uses non-traditional collectors, so these are basically the experts, scientists, business people, and students, to acquire technology and technological know-how. Our current system is not designed to counter this kind of threat. Current mitigation tools are tactical and narrowed by design because they are crafted to mitigate behaviors with the assumption that the actor fully participates in laws-based, rules-based system. They are not designed for they are basically designed for traditional counterintelligence threats that focus on intelligence officers, military end use, and illegal activities. The protections in the CHIPS Act and NSPM 33, and as a result, some of the individual programs that have been put in place by agencies such as ARTES and NSF Secure Analytics are a good start. However, in my written testimony, I provide some factors for consideration when determining access to the labs and funding decisions. But reviewing individual factors can help, but what we really need is a more comprehensive mitigation strategy. Piecemeal solutions will not have the desired outcomes. So I covered these three suggestions in more detail in my written testimony, but briefly I put forth the following elements that would make up a national level program. First is establishing a national center for open source information. This would provide detailed information at scale for our institutions and help them make informed decisions. Second would be to create a kind of pre-check for collaboration. It's important to establish an accepted framework of protections and make those clear. The standards, the norms, the expectations for visiting researchers, postdoctoral scientists, and students. And those that agree to those parameters have a fast lane for collaborations. And finally, investing in the future. The investments we make or do not make today will impact our future competitiveness tomorrow. So in conclusion, it's important to remember that China takes a holistic approach to development. It blurs civilian and military, private and public. This has deep implications for the DOE complex because it impacts the basis of entry for Chinese students and postdocs to U.S. labs. Chinese laws, which include the ability to compel citizens to share information regardless of who owns it, also complicates the ability for individual researchers to act independently. So moving forward, I leave the committee with the following thoughts. We really must decide what winning looks like and take a comprehensive strategy. Extreme positions such as closing our eyes or closing our doors only benefit China. We either discredit all the efforts to address the problem or we deprive ourselves of the contributions of foreign-born students or scientists. And China is not a neutral actor. And why does this matter? Because China intimidates and harshly silences its critics. This has only grown in the past few years and places individuals in untenable situations. We do our foreign students and colleagues a disservice by not highlighting this behavior. So I want to thank the committee again for continuing to discuss this issue. These issues will make us uncomfortable because they challenge assumptions and established norms. However, we as a nation have to have these conversations if we're going to protect and promote U.S. competitiveness. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Richmond.
Thank you very much, Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Heinrich, and the distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee on the important subject of protecting the integrity of U.S. research enterprise from inappropriate foreign influence. As a lifelong scientist working in science for 50 years now, and researcher, and also a devoted educator, I understand the critical importance of talking about this topic for maintaining the nation's competitive edge in science and technology and ensuring that our research efforts remain secure and beneficial to the American public. And may I add, in these 50 years, I have seen dramatic changes in how we've interacted with countries of concern like China. I have seen them change. I have seen the threats become even stronger, and they are as much concern to me as they were when I was Undersecretary. The United States has long been a global leader in scientific discovery and technological innovation. It's one of the reasons why we are able to attract the best and the brightest in the world. According to a 2024 report from the National Science Foundation, foreign-born workers make up 19% of the overall STEM workforce, as Senator Heinrich pointed out, and 60% of the doctoral level in computer and mathematics. Scientists and engineers in the U.S. were born outside this country. We are an open, innovative society. It is the key driver of our economic success. At the same time, I realize, as we have at the Department of Energy when I was there, the actions of certain foreign governments pose unacceptable risks to the scientific enterprise. During my tenure on the National Science Board, under President Trump, and now recently as Undersecretary for Science and Innovation in the Department of Energy under Biden, I saw firsthand the growing threats to the U.S. leadership in science technology. As this committee well knows, the U.S. enterprise would not function without foreign-born scientists and engineers, but we also cannot afford to have things stolen from us, property stolen from us by nefarious acts that threaten our U.S. economy and our national security. We must strike a careful balance if we are to protect national security interests without stifling the innovation that has long been our nation's greatest strength. During my time as Undersecretary, DOE and its 17 national laboratories worked diligently to achieve the balance by aggressively strengthening research security through rigorous background screening, export controls, and collaboration policies to mitigate risks of intellectual property theft and undue foreign influence. For example, DOE developed a science and technology risk matrix, as noted, to protect emerging technologies, and it continues to be updated. This matrix provides a guidance to address potential concerns associated with economic and international competitiveness by identifying the risk associated with a given topic and the resulting level of controls that are required. DOE also developed a comprehensive and rigorous approach to research technology and economic security, what we'll refer to as RTES policy, established new procedures for reviewing financial awards and loans, and created a new RTES office to continue to evolve DOE's enhanced due diligence process, engage with external stakeholders, and review DOE National Lab agreements involving foreign entities. These actions were supported by the research security directives from Congress, thank you, and administrative actions by the National Security Presidential Memorandum, which was worked on both in the Trump administration and the Biden administration, NSPM 33. Together, these measures are helping the department and its partners mitigate risks that malign foreign governments pose to our research ecosystem, supply chains, and intellectual property. For most U.S. universities, research universities, the level of due diligence required by NSPM 33 and DOE's updated policies is a newer paradigm. I saw this when I was on the National Science Board, and I've seen it now. Research universities serve a critical interface between government, industry, and academia, and since I'm back in academia, I know this, go back to my home. That is why during my tenure as Undersecretary, DOE focused heavily on helping universities develop their own procedures for fostering secure yet open scientific collaboration and training researchers on best practices. I am proud of the way many universities and administrations have stepped up to this research security challenge, including my own at the University of Oregon. Security is in the DNA and the structure of our national laboratories. It hasn't been historically at our national laboratories and in DOE. It has not been the case at universities. That's why it's so important for us to work with them. So as this committee is evaluating research security measures of the U.S. science and technology research enterprise, I have offered several recommendations that are important to consider. While I cannot speak to the status of DOE activities in my current capacity, I can assure the committee that regardless of the administration, the Department of Energy and its national laboratories take its responsibility to protect the scientific integrity of our nation's assets seriously. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on this important issue, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thanks so much to all of you for your opening statements. We'll now proceed to 5-minute rounds of questions alternating between Republicans and Democrats, and I'll begin that now. Ms. Puglisi, I'd like to start with you, if that's all right. Last week, the New York Times published an article in which you were prominently featured. You were featured discussing how the CCP has used legal threats to intimidate American researchers, including yourself, in an effort to suppress research that exposes its influence operations. Now, if the CCP is brazen enough to do this, to try to pressure and influence American researchers, what does that say about the ability that they have to exert pressure on Chinese nationals from the People's Republic of China, working within U.S. national labs, especially keeping in mind that those individuals, if they are residents of the, if they're residents of China, what does that say about their ability to have pressure brought to bear on them, given that they're subject to Chinese laws that can compel them to cooperate with PRC intelligence gathering operations?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I think, it really highlights a disturbing trend, right? I believe that, we've talked a lot about the hope was that as we moved forward with engagement and collaborations that China would change and its laws and rules and norms would become more like our own. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And so I think, as I made in my opening statement in my written testimony, the importance of talking about this behavior, and that if we ignore the pressures that these scientists and students are under, we really do them a disservice, and we do our own society a disservice, because then we become more like them. But it really, I think highlights as well that it's really hard, for us to understand that kind of pressure, and that we need to put in place those guidelines to both foster, those collaborations, but also to protect that technology and to ensure that that doesn't happen.
But needless to say, the pressure that can be brought to bear on Chinese nationals at these labs is immense.
Yes, it is. And I think it highlights, as we've seen over the past year, the articles and stories about kind of extra-legal behavior, not only for scientists, but on different campuses of, China's actions.
Now, Mr. DeBar, your testimony states that the Department of Energy under the Biden administration restarted engagement with China to share U.S. energy technologies developed in our national labs. In at least one instance in 2023, at a Lawrence Berkeley National Lab scientist went to China, where he advised the dean of the School of Energy, Power, and Engineering at Zhengzhou University, who also happens to be an affiliate of the foreign influence arm of the Chinese Communist Party, on how best to construct an engineering lab for the school. Do you think U.S. national labs should be engaged in these efforts with our greatest global adversary? And should American taxpayers be funding such support that ends up benefiting our adversaries in this way?
No, Senator Lee, I don't think we should. They've been very clear that they want to dominate the tech space. And as I listed in my testimony, there's a long series of technologies, including in energy, that were invented at the DOE National Labs, invented by American companies, that was stolen. And so there's a long track record on this topic of much of which they're selling the world was invented in America. And so I think we need to be much more cognizant of this topic, and I think more controls are needed on this, as I mentioned in my testimony.
So that's an expensive proposition, losing valuable research for which we've paid dearly, and having it go to our greatest geopolitical adversary isn't an ideal outcome. Quite far from it. This can have devastating consequences. Now, Section 436 of the FY 2025 Intelligence Authorization Act, which barred foreign nationals from adversarial nations from accessing our national laboratories received unanimous approval from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence by a vote of 17-0. But it was blocked from the National Defense Authorization Act due to opposition from the former chairman of this committee. The provision included a waiver process allowing exceptions when the Secretary of Energy determined the national or economic security benefits outweighed the risks. Now, given these strong bipartisan concerns, would you support enacting similar safeguards to protect most sensitive research while allowing for limited high-level exceptions?
I would, Senator. Obviously, it's a bipartisan topic. The way the current DOE order is written, that was done when I was undersecretary, basically required sign-offs to have any Chinese interaction. I believe a lot of it was delegated down to lower levels, which basically opened the doors, as far as I could tell from my conversations with DOE. I think we need to potentially do exactly as the Intelligence Committee looked at, which is flip it. Instead of authorizing and sign-offs, is to do it the other way, which is the base case is to ban that from adversary nations and to give waivers as required. I think that's a better way, given decades of Chinese infiltration and attempts.
Leaving the defaulted on is dangerous, in other words. I see my time's expired. We'll turn the time over to Senator Heinrich.
Thanks, Chairman. Ms. Richmond, you and I have interacted at some of our nation's most cherished national labs, places like Los Alamos. Do you have thoughts on what the current dismissals at DOE and NNSA could mean for our national security in the long term, and in particular for workforce morale?
Sorry. Thank you for that question. I agree, and you know, I hope you all know how committed I was in my position and now with regards to national security and the concern of China stealing our most valuable assets. But these cuts, particularly in the security area, but also having to do with our energy infrastructure, the cuts there too, give me even greater concern because they're immediate. Because to be able to work at NNSA, but also to be able to handle classified information, it requires a tremendous amount of background checks, polygraph. They ask all your neighbors. And so my neighbors are sick of being asked for all these things I've done. But the point is that when we make these cuts, even if we say, come on back after this weekend cut, what are the chances that we've increased the risk of someone being hired by China to come over and share what they've been doing? I, too, have been recruited. I got a letter not too long ago that was like, for 1 hour's work, could I take $40,000? Now, you know, I don't have a mortgage to pay, but there are other people that do. So I just have to say that these cuts, and especially how they're going to impact the energy infrastructure, I think it's time for us to go to the new administration and to Secretary Wright and ask what was the process to decide how to do that, to make these cuts, because the process that we have at the Department of Energy to make cuts, and we do make cuts in our foreign from our federal employees, is it's based on budget priorities. When we develop our budgets, we set the priorities, and if your part of DOE doesn't fit in those priorities of the White House and also the Secretary of Energy, then you eliminate those people. But you do it in almost a 2-year process while you develop this budget, because the priorities are changing all the time.
And one of the things that I think it's important to share with folks is that one of the probably the leading red flag for someone being a risk with respect to recruitment is financial distress. So we just created a whole bunch of people with really important clearances, really important expertise, who are all under financial distress. We created a bunch of targets for the CCP. And I think I'm aghast at how unthoughtfully this is all being carried out. Mr. DeBar, good to see you again. I want to ask you to sort of walk us through what currently happens. We'll talk about how the intelligence officers at the labs, the lab directors, and then DOE intelligence coordinate, and then what happens when they don't all line up and agree.
Yes, Senator. So obviously this has been a big focus. There's a classified report from MITRE that's out there that has evaluated the details of that. I think that's kind of safe to say, and they've obviously had some recommendations on that particular topic. In general, what happens is that the intelligence component of the DOE has local officers at each of the labs for counterintelligence. They will do the screening of employees, if people are travel, interactions, grant security clearances. And so they do that interaction as part of that intelligence component with the lab complex. In general, that works quite well. DOE's intel arm is quite well integrated with that effort. And I think the biggest challenge on this is not the structure of it, but as I was mentioning, who has the approval, right, to allow this interaction to happen? I'll give an example. I've been told that many times any lab employee can actually do a recommendation and potentially, I've heard, even a sign-off on people coming to visit a lab. And so if there's a PRC citizen who is employed at the lab, they could recommend another PRC group coming from China to enter the lab. And if the authority has been delegated down to the lab, sometimes these things are happening at a higher rate than maybe some people at headquarters might like. And so this who has authority and to sign off and the interaction of that, I think that's the core practical issue that probably deserves to be raised to a more senior level than has, I believe, been delegated.
If you have specific examples of that, I would appreciate it if you would share them with this committee. Thanks.
Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For my work on the Intelligence Committee over the last 10 years and now as chairman, I can tell you this issue is a critical concern to me. Our national labs are where we develop some of the scientific research and capabilities that are the envy of the world, but they lack security measures. And I can say that it's not just me, it's many other members of the Intelligence Committee. 5 members are on this committee. There's a reason why we passed legislation last year unanimously that would have stopped scientists from China and Russia and even Iran and North Korea and Cuba from being in our labs. Mr. DeBar, do you know how many Chinese and Russian scientists were in our labs in the last fiscal year for which we have data?
If I've seen your past testimony, I think the number is around 8,000.
8,000? Out of a total of how many, do you know?
Well, total lab employees are probably...
No, total foreign visitors.
Oh, I'm not certain about that.
40,000. So 1 out of every 5 foreign scientists in an American national lab is Chinese or Russian. Do you know how many American scientists get to go to equivalent sites in China and Russia? Do you know, Mr.?
I think it's less.
If I put the over-under at 0.5, would you bet the over or the under?
Maybe even under.
Ms. Puglisi, how many American scientists get to go to Russia, the equivalent sites in Russia and China?
Right, Senator, I currently don't have that number. However, I think that's a point that I've made before this committee and others, is that it's that reciprocity. I mean, true collaboration comes from transparency, reciprocity, and that's one of the things that we are not.
I couldn't agree more. Ms. Richmond, do you think 1 out of every 5 foreign scientists at a Chinese or Russian equivalent site is American?
I don't know those numbers. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's zero reciprocity on this issue. Why would we allow Chinese and Russian scientists into our national labs, to say nothing of Iranians and Cubans and North Koreans, when they don't allow our scientists there? That we've told the directors of these labs for a long time in the Intelligence Committee that if they do not get a hold of this problem, then the Congress will solve it for them. And the legislation that we introduced and passed with the Intelligence Committee last year, although it didn't get passed in law, will be brought back up this year. And I'm going to champion that on this committee and on the Intelligence Committee, because we have to put an end to this threat. There's a lot of great people working in the Department of Energy, to include at our labs and at the Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, one of the very best of our small intelligence offices around the government. But there are too many people who have this open science mindset, this naive ideological commitment that we have to allow these foreign adversary scientists into our labs no matter what the risk. Mr. Barr, who has the final word on allowing such a foreign visitor to visit his or her lab?
So the order is flexible on who has the authority. Previously, when we instituted it, when I was undersecretary, it was required to be up at my level. And we were able to squash a lot of the 1,000 Talents programs. We found many people working for China, including on joint nuclear weapons work. That's a pretty stunning comment I just gave that we found at one of the labs. I believe I was told in my conversations with DOE recently is that a lot of that's been delegated down to the individual lab level, and I'm not exactly sure.
And again, we have great people working in our individual labs, but by and large, the directors of these places tend to come from a scientific background. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
They're not coming from the intelligence community. They're not coming from law enforcement. If a foreign national is excluded from one lab, is he therefore excluded from every other lab?
I'm not certain how it's currently being executed.
I think the answer is no.
Yeah.
If one foreign lab director, or if one of our lab directors says, no, this guy from Russia is too dangerous a risk and can't be here, he can just turn around and try to go to one of the other labs as well. Is it fair to say that sometimes there's a little bit of competition between these labs for money or prestige or talent?
Senator, during one of my many times of uncovering things with intelligence, counterintelligence at the labs, we found a Chinese national who had been hired to one of the DOE labs, and then they used that to shift to NIST in Colorado and use the impromptu of having been hired at a DOE national lab to join a very important quantum effort at NIST. And as soon as we found that out, we had to reach out to Commerce very quickly and point out that we were sorry that this person had gotten that role, and basically we allowed them to end up at another lab.
Thank you. I just want to thank the chairman for having this hearing. This is not something that we discuss much in a public setting. We've examined it very closely for years on the Intelligence Committee, but it is a grave national security threat. It's a threat to our prosperity as well, because so much of these technologies end up getting commercialized. And to be clear, what we're talking about here, again, is foreign nationals. There's been a lot of testimony or a lot of statements from members and the witnesses about the history throughout American life of foreign-born naturalized scientists. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about someone who's raised their hand and taken the oath of affirmation to become a citizen or even a legal permanent resident. We're talking about foreign nationals coming to our lab. This is a grave threat, and we can't allow it to continue.
Thank you. Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good to have all our guests, and especially good to be able to welcome Dr. Jerry Richmond, who is a longtime expert in security and also a longtime University of Oregon Duck. And we welcome you. Let me, if I might, ask you about what we learned at DOE in the Pacific Northwest here very recently. There were abrupt and significant workforce reductions last week in the office that carries out the critical work to keep our electric grid reliable. My take is that this raises national security issues. It raises fundamental issues for our economy. What are the implications of something like that, Dr. Richmond?
Well, thank you, Senator Wyden. It's good to be here with you, too. I think that in terms of our power, our energy infrastructure, and particularly the cuts at BPA, as well as the 1,800 people that were just cut off at the Department of Energy with no clear understanding of the procedure or why, it really is going to, I believe, as a citizen, that it's going to not only compromise the safety of our grid, but also will drive up energy prices. I believe that it will delay current projects in communities and that it will disrupt our supply chains. These are, again, my personal opinions, having served as the Undersecretary for over 3 years. But I think it also is sowing confusion among and chaos among the federal workers because of what they're learning about things in the news. And I can't confirm what's in the news either, but the point is that it's just leading to a lot of confusion. But for example, with BPA, there were a number of employees that were cut. And a Pacific Northwesterner like you, that's really chilling because I know that because BPA is so important.
Let me see if I can get a couple of other questions in real quickly. When you went through the process of getting your security clearance, did you have to disclose all of your foreign financial conflicts of interest and contacts with government officials?
Yes. In fact, I have, because I've worked in so many different countries, over 24 developing countries in particular, I had to list all the countries I'd been to, whether they had paid for my travel support, which most of them did not, whether I had any kind of a conflict of interest with them, with any type of financial support from them continuing, what all my finances are with regards to all of the investments that we have. We had to declare all those. We had to be cleared for general counsel. I had to get a polygraph test.
I think I got the drift.
Okay.
If a U.S. government official had significant business dealings with the government of China or failed to disclose all of these contacts with Chinese government officials, could that derail their access to sensitive Department of Energy secrets or classified information?
Yes. And in fact, what happens in the laboratories during my time was you have both the IN and also the lab leaders talking about when there's a concern about a person being in the laboratory. And what they go through is who's going to come on site, what is their background, what kind of access would be controlled if they did come on site, and this is for visitors also, and what projects can they work on and what partnerships do they have. If there's a disagreement between those two entities in the laboratory, then it gets sent up to me. I did not have any concerning ones that came up to me. Okay. And the laboratory said this, the HSST hearing director said this last week.
Thank you, Dr. Richmond. Colleagues, I'm asking these questions for several reasons, and one of them is, according to public reporting, Mr. Elon Musk is running Doge while remaining Tesla's largest shareholder. And according to that public reporting, Tesla's invested billions in China and makes 1 million cars a year at a factory in Shanghai on land owned by the Chinese government. Finally, according to public reporting, Tesla's contract allows the Chinese government to revoke Tesla's lease on the land at any time if it determines doing so is in the public interest. Now, on this committee, every one of us works for the American public interest. And given that as our highest priority, I intend colleagues to come back and ask further questions about this in the days ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. Senator McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our panel. Grateful to the witnesses for coming to discuss such an important issue for our national security, but also for Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh's the home of the National Energy Technology Laboratory. Many employees from the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory commute across the Delaware River to call Pennsylvania home. And we must ensure that this critical national research, these wonderful assets, are secure from foreign adversaries, and that America remains the global leader on energy and other advanced technologies. So I really share the concerns raised by so many of you today about the continued theft of American research and innovation by the Communist Chinese Party. It's a huge national security risk for all the reasons we've talked about. But it's also the stated goal to dominate the commanding heights of technology and to use that technological supremacy to undermine America's economic might, its geopolitical position, our very way of life. And that research and technology theft is a well-documented key pillar of the CCP strategy. So with forced technology transfers, IP theft, scientific espionage, not only providing the CCP with advantages in economic and environmental important technologies, it's also undercutting American workers in Pennsylvania and other places. We are essentially paying for the R&D that China steals to beat us in the market space. How can American companies compete in that environment? So let me start with you, Ms. Puglisi. You pointed out because the CCP does not play by the same rules in science and technology, that our often narrow research security tools are outmatched by China's efforts to steal American technology and know-how. How can we make the jump from piecemeal solutions, some of which we've discussed here, to a national strategy for mitigating these threats?
Okay, thank you, Senator, for that question. I think it's important to highlight first, and the reason why what creates this challenge is China takes a very hybrid approach. It takes a very holistic approach to its S&T development, and so oftentimes, we try to separate things out into complete buckets. And so to have a national approach, what we need to do is recognize how different this system is, right? And to look at the individuals and the companies that we're dealing with holistically and acknowledge that those ties to the Chinese government and in moving forward have policies that are across both our infrastructure and in commerce that recognize that these are supported, that they oftentimes don't have to make market-based decisions, that individuals, and we know this, are sent to study here, to work in the laboratories for a purpose. And we just have to be much more deliberate about the way we look at people's backgrounds. And to begin with, I think, is putting in place very clear guidelines because, our system has been built on trust, right? And I've been in the lab, I've worked, in the lab, and no one wants to believe that their collaborator is stealing their technology or the student that they're supporting is doing that or has some other alternative motives. And so we must make it very clear.
And yet we know they are.
Yes.
In many cases,
and unfortunately, this has been the case, and it's well documented. The other witnesses have talked about this. I myself has written a lot about this. And so I think the starting point is being very clear. What are those assumptions that we're making? And, sometimes we can't get to yes with some of these collaborations. And that's why we have to engage with the research community to really make clear on that.
Thank you. I'm going to just move on to one more question here, if I can. Thank you. Mr. DeBar, good to see you again. Many research institutions, just following up on this question, including the national labs, are engaging in research collaboration with third parties. I don't think we've talked about that much here in the United States and overseas. And those third parties can also be exploited by our adversaries to steal sensitive research, particularly the CCP. What policies should DOE put in place to ensure that the research collaborations and joint research projects that may be outside the labs don't create additional security vulnerabilities? What authorities or directives can Congress use to help on that mission?
So that certainly happens. Let me give you an example. We do accelerator technology with our European friends, where they ship us some accelerators sometimes, and we ship them some equipment sometimes. We generate IP in some of these very large pieces of equipment that could have dual use points. And sometimes the Chinese go into Germany, to a lab in Germany, to try to appropriate IP that we invented at one of our national labs. I know that happened. I have specific examples of that. So I do think of any of our collaborations with our allies, we need to push the ball. I think we have pushed the ball of awareness of them in Germany, France, and whatnot, that China's trying to steal stuff, and that if they want to work with us, and we're going to share technology with them, they have to meet the same sort of standards that we have.
So I think it's fair to say, regardless of how tight our security is in our own labs, if we have third-party research efforts underway that aren't equally strong in the security measures, then there's a backdoor where some of the same challenges of IP theft and so forth can occur.
Absolutely, Senator. I'll pick on one thing, as Senator Risch has been doing on fusion. America's about to break some major bounds on fusion in this next 4 years. There's going to be some major examples. They're trying to steal it from us and our international collaborations on fusion. And so that's something that historically was more open science. And I think very clearly, both domestically as well as international, that needs to be greatly enhanced, since we're about to accomplish quite a bit.
Thank you.
Senator Gallego, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perfect timing. And thank you again for our witnesses for being here. And our ranking member also. Our national energy security should always be, of course, top of mind. I was proud to be a leader in passing the FY 2005 or 2025 NDAA, among many other things that bill enhanced vetting and limited the entrance of certain foreign nationals to DOE lab facilities to protect national security. But as former chairman of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Intelligence and Special Operations, I also know exactly how important it is to be deliberate in the way we discuss sensitive operations, especially in open settings. As we do our duty to oversee national labs in this committee, we must not give away information that our adversaries could use against us or actively gather. So I have a couple questions for Dr. Richmond. In United States military operations, our armed forces work with interpreters and local allies who make our operations more secure and successful. I certainly experienced that in Iraq in combat with both local nationals as well as foreign nationals and third-party companies. And so we've talked a lot about the risks of foreign infiltration in our DOE labs. Can you expand on the risks of siloing ourselves too much and missing vital information from our allies and foreign-born scientists?
Yes, thank you, Senator, and thank you for your service also. I think that we cannot closet ourselves. I have to say that before the wall came down in Europe, I was actually in East Germany, and I got to see, it was weeks before the wall came down, and I could see what a closeted country looks like. I've also done the same in Cuba. We have to rely on intelligence from other countries too. We have to decide whether we trust it or not. We have to decide what we're going to do with it. But I'm going to go back to, for your comments, ma'am, because we need a coordinated effort across the all agencies and universities if we're going to use what intelligence we have in order to move forward. And and the armed forces play a critical role in that. And as you know, if we didn't have that outside information, those partners with us, it would be tough to go forward.
And even along the kind of siloing of information and sharing of information, from my experience kind of as the past chairman of Intel and Special Operations, I even had complaints from our Five Eye nations, people that we're supposed to have and share our most intricate and sophisticated intelligence, that we still were in such a silo that we couldn't really share our intel across platforms fast enough for them to actually use as actionable intelligence. When it comes to sharing with our kind of our close Five Eye partners or other intelligence treaty nations, do you see that also still being a problem in terms of some of the research that is found in, maybe the UK, for example, is not as quickly transferable or easily shared for us to actually consume, use, or effectively continue the research on?
Well, I think it's important. Thank you for that question. I think it's important for us to add to this conversation this issue of open science. Open science is science that's going to end up in the literature. It's going to be published together. That kind of collaboration happens at the laboratory because it's natural to do that, whether it be in fields like I've worked in with lasers and optics and other fields too. We have to have that open science. So what I fear, the discussion of really restricting the labs to even things in personnel, even things that are truly open science, then my concerns are there. So I don't know if that went to your question, but it's a point I feel is really important for this committee, many who are not scientists, to understand what the open science is as opposed to something that's truly an economic threat to us.
And your testimony outlines multiple measures, including a risk matrix to protect emerging research and tech at DOE. Are you also concerned that any of those security measures will be disrupted or dismantled under kind of new agency leadership doesn't really understand the goal and intent of those types of that matrix?
As as a citizen myself, yes, I am concerned, because when you have what we've always found when I've gone into the SCIF, and I'm not going to divulge any classified information, first of all, we do have people from other countries that are helping us in the intelligence for some of these countries. But the point is that we really have to be able to go forward in a manner that allows us to share the information that we need and be able to go forward. I'm not sure if that quite went to your point.
Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this meeting. Look, this is this is a really, really important issue that gets almost no attention. I've been 17 years on both Foreign Relations Committee and the Intel Committee, and we've watched this cancer grow over those years, and it's not going away. It's getting worse and worse. So I'm going to start at 50,000 feet and bring this down. 1983, I traveled in China. I left China thinking, you know, we're never going to have to worry about this. They had no plumbing, they had no toilets, they had no phones, they had nothing. It smelled. It was terrible. That was in 1983. If you go there today, it's like America. Now, it took us over 200 years to get where we are, and it's taken them only a handful of decades to get where. Are they that much smarter than we are? We all know better than that. They stole every good idea that we have, except for democracy and respect for human rights. So, how'd that happen? Well, it happened because America is so open and so free that we just opened the floodgates. And today, this problem of the people coming into the labs is joined with the question of people that come into the colleges and universities. They are identical problem, and the numbers are stunning. Americans have no idea that there are hundreds of thousands of Chinese students studying in America, and we have a tiny fraction of that. And as Tom Cotton pointed out, he went and dug out the figures of the thousands of Chinese people who visited our labs, and zero have visited, of Americans have visited their labs. I'm intimately familiar with the INL, of course, the birthplace of nuclear energy and the planet. And I talk to those people all the time. I have never met a person who has set foot in a Chinese laboratory. So this is the problem. We have given away the farm, and I would disagree with Ms. Richmond about open science. We should never have given them that, but that ship has sailed. The open science is there. It's all over the internet. It's every place. But they have used it to bootstrap themselves up where they are. So let's change lanes for just a second and talk about who we're dealing with. A student who comes here, or for that matter, an engineer who comes here and goes to one of the labs, may have no malign ideas whatsoever. But for a person who lives in a communist, autocratic country, nothing belongs to them. Their property doesn't belong to them. Their thinking doesn't belong to them. Their intellectual knowledge doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the Chinese Communist Party. Because in those states, the state doesn't exist for the people, as it does in a democracy like we have. People exist for the state, and the state always comes ahead of the people. And so they take these people. When the students go home, they are debriefed by the Chinese Communist Party, and every scintilla of information they have then belongs to the Chinese Communist Party. And I mean, it's two different systems. There's absolutely no question about it. But again, it's really time to slam the door on this thing. I have preached about this for years, and with all due respect to the scientific community, I can't get it through their head that this is a national security issue. They say, well, we're all on this planet together. The knowledge we have helps everybody. Well, yeah, to a degree, if we're fighting polio, that's true, but not when we're designing quantum computers. It's not like that at all, and we shouldn't be sharing that information at all. And by the way, I get real pushback from the colleges and universities. Why? There are millions of dollars being transferred from China to the colleges and universities. And those colleges and universities get very defensive of the grants and that they get from the Chinese Communist Party. Anyway, that's where we are. Folks, how do we get the word out to the community, and how do we get the word out to Americans that this is a huge problem? And I only got a few minutes left. Start down here and give me your 30-second take on that.
Okay, thank you, Senator. First, I just want to add, the whole issue of basic science comes up quite a bit. But it's important to note the collaborations are very important. And I myself have been a proponent for open science. However, I think what's lost in that conversation is not everything is shared. And that is the challenge, because what is happening is that the time and resource intensive parts of that basic research oftentimes the data, the know-how, the access to how do I actually do something, and oftentimes what doesn't work is what's stolen. And so those are the kinds of things I think that we really need to focus and have that conversation.
Ms. Richmond, I'm almost out of, I am out of, give me a short shot and I'm going to give you.
Yeah, let me say, glad to meet you. I have been through Chinese laboratories back in 2010.
Oh, I've met somebody, finally. All right, I've met one. How many people in America?
Okay.
333 million? All right, I've got one.
Yeah, but the point is, things are changing.
By the way, did you get into the Wuhan lab? Because we're really interested in getting in. Probably not.
You know, I can't read Chinese, so I have no idea what lab I was in, okay? But the point is, you raise a very important point. Things are changing. Your issue about the open science is right. But on the other hand, collaborations are really important too. But again, I believe that we need to have a full discussion of this out in the open. Universities need to, and faculty at universities need to understand that they could be involved in the areas of high-performance computing, AI, quantum, bioscience, biotech, accelerator science, battery science that we at the labs consider to be extraordinarily high risk, so that they can understand that they are important.
You got that exactly right.
Yeah.
Paul.
Senator, I think this is a big but narrow topic. America is the bright light to recruit people from all around the world who want to work at the DOE national labs. And people want to become Americans, and I think that's good. We have, when I was there, we had 4 lab directors who were naturalized citizens from the UK and Canada and Germany and so on, and that's excellent, right? They came here, they became American citizens. We're still a very small percentage of the world in terms of population in the big scheme of things, and I think doing that and all the other people underneath them with citizens from all over. China's a topic.
China's a problem.
China's the biggest topic.
Those people can't stay here.
That's right.
We all know what happens to their families if they say, "Hey, we're giving up China and we're going to become a U.S. citizen." They'll start. Well, anyway, I don't want to go into that. They do bad things to their families. So my time's up. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. I appreciate the panel discussion today. It's good to see some of you again. Let me start off with the Nevada National Security Site. Most people don't have it in their backyard. I do. Most people don't grow up next to it. I did. Most people don't have family and friends that worked there. I have and still do. So this is an issue that is important for us in Nevada, and I appreciate the conversation today. But Dr. Richmond, let me start with you. In your testimony, you outlined various legislation like the CHIPS and Science Act, the Fiscal Year 25 National Defense Authorization Act that address research security concerns that we've talked about, right, that are getting ready to go into effect. Specifically, though, you mentioned the DOE was getting prepared to implement Section 3112 of the NDAA, which would ban foreign nationals from China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran from accessing the national laboratories operated by the National Nuclear Security Administration, right, without secretarial waivers. So given the enhanced research security measures outlined in the fiscal year 25 NDAA, how do you think these new regulations will affect the mission at Nevada's national laboratories, such as the Nevada National Security Site, which we know is essential for maintaining our nation's nuclear weapons stockpile?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question. As you may know, Director Ruby, Jill Ruby, was the one that oversaw NNSA while I was in my position. So I don't have all the depth of knowledge that she would have. But I do think that the lab directors that spoke last week on that at HSST, even Dr. Kim Budell was there, and she does oversee Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And all 5 directors that were there, 3 or 4 of them were NNSA labs. They're ready to do it and have accepted it, and will have it done by April 15th, or what the deadline is.
Okay.
What impact that has, I can't speculate on it. But I think they're ready to take it on. The concern is, though, that they are now going to have to fire, I think, a number of people. I think it was close to 1,000 or something like that. And that, again, compromises our security because those people can easily be picked up by our adversaries. So
can I touch on that? Because I only have so much time, and that was my next question. Because we are now implementing legislation to address foreign nationals coming into our labs. But what we are not doing is addressing the workforce that is necessary. Now, I've heard all of you, and we've had this conversation before about STEM, making sure our kids are exposed to it, that we want to go into that area of science. We want to make sure that they are now stepping into, as they graduate, jobs like we have at the test site. What does it say to them that we have just done this wholesale firing of people, particularly in my state? People are paying attention. They're family members, they're friends, they know what's going on. What does that say to our ability to develop that workforce for the future in these STEM courses?
Okay, I'll put my academic hat on now. People are scared. Students are scared. Parents of students are scared. Spouses are scared about paying mortgages. That all the energy that they've put into this passion they have for science is now being questioned for its value. It's very personal.
Let me touch on one final thing. We have talked about foreign nationals, and I agree. We have to address it. We have passed legislation to do just that. But there are other security challenges we're not even talking about. Cyber threats. Where are we talking about cyber threats here? And should we be addressing that as Congress as well? And let me open it up to any of the panel members. Talk to me about cyber threats. What should we know that we're not talking about today that's the next step for us to implement when it comes to our national labs? Ms. Puglisi or Debar, I'm just curious.
I'll please off and we can go that way. That's a very important point, and that's why I advocate that we really need a holistic, comprehensive program that looks across the board, and cyber would be one of those, and also both external and internal to understand, okay, who's sharing what with whom. So that's one. And I just want to pull the thread on the collaborations because that is an important point. And why we really need to demand that reciprocity and transparency, because it can't be a one-way street, right? And we talked about how many people are in our labs, how many people in their labs. I mean, these are serious topics, and serious countries do serious things. And so we need to ensure that that there is that reciprocity of not only people, but information. And one of the challenges, I think, with China is they are clamping down on open science, access to their data, access to academic papers. You know, that doesn't demonstrate to me a place that it has a serious desire to do true collaborations.
Thank you. I know my time is up. Mr. Var, do you have any?
So, Senator, this is a university example, but not a lab example. This goes to show you that you need to have strict controls, and sometimes things can go wrong. We found a cybersecurity effort that was funded by DOE at a university in which all the principal investigators were PRC nationals. Electric grid cybersecurity funded by DOE at a university with PRC nationals developing the software for cybersecurity for the electric grid. We stopped that as soon as we found out that that had been done. And I won't go through the details, but it's an example that people were not thinking, okay, at the department when they were issuing funding of something that I think is pretty common sense. So I think it comes back to rules and proper oversight so that people down below don't do things that wouldn't pass, kind of common sense for, I think, anyone in this room.
But if we don't have the staff to catch it. Thank you.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The focus today has been on national security, as well it should be. That's one of our jobs around here. On the other hand, there's an opportunity cost of excluding talent that could be important in furthering our own interest in terms of technological development. Ms. Richmond, talk to me about that. It seems to me what we really need to do is try to find a path between total exclusion and not being cognizant of national security risks, but not exclude people who can make a significant contribution to our national welfare. You see what I'm trying to find?
Yes, so Senator King, thank you for that question. There are so many examples of where Chinese citizens have made, I'd be happy to give the committee many examples, especially of Chinese researchers who continue to contribute in our laboratories and also our universities. It is a balance. And particularly for our universities, we have, while I was undersecretary, we started the ARTES office, which is Research for Technology and Economic Security. And that is basically to make sure that we don't have things happen like happened in your administration, which would check everyone that's a PI going in for a grant. The FOA that goes out, it's checked to make sure that it's very clear that we're going to ask this kind of information when you apply for a grant. Then when the selections are made, look to see who the PIs are. Are they ones that are safe to go forward with? Is the topic one? What about the topic? Because the security for some topics.
But universities don't have the security clearance apparatus that the national labs have. I believe that there may be more risk, frankly, on the university level than there is at the national labs, because national labs, you have counterintelligence at Department of Energy, and you have those kinds of examinations.
And that's why we're working with them. And that's why we're sharing the risk matrix with them, as well as I was on a video call recently to talk about what they need to do in proposals and with their PIs to give them guidance on making sure.
Mr. DeBarber, how do you think we should strike this balance?
Yeah, so one of the orders that we also implemented was banning giving money to university researchers if they were also taking money under a 1,000 Talents program. We had found out that during the previous administration that they had allowed that, so that literally a researcher could be getting money from the Chinese state at the same time as from DOE. We decided that was a bad idea. We actually spent a bunch of time with university presidents explaining that. They had a lot of worry about that. And then at the end of the day, they reached a conclusion that the federal government can decide what to do with its money. I know it's a simple kind of conclusion. But one of the big things that they found as a part of our pushing on this topic was that they found out that they had researchers who were spending significant times in communist China and basically taking their research, had nothing to do with DOE, it could have been from any place. And they didn't even know it was happening. I found out at Stanford, for example, there was a professor who was supposedly full-time who spent 9 months a year in China. And the university didn't even realize it was going on, even though they were paying them that professor. So I think awareness with the university system that they need to address their own problems, but I do think additional controls around how the federal government money is given to PIs, so principal investigators.
Well, let's go back to the national labs.
Yeah.
Would if there's a total ban, no Chinese researchers whatsoever, is that a good policy, or would that cost us some good scientific breakthroughs that would otherwise be useful? I'm trying to find the right line between national security and opportunity cost of brilliant researchers from anywhere in the world.
I think, Senator, given that there's been literally a whole generation of successful efforts by Communist China on stealing stuff, the Los Alamos Club, but then the 1,000 Talents, they keep coming at us. I think the better way of doing it is this proposed legislation from the Intel Committee that was referenced, which is a ban with Chinese nationals at the national labs, which are at the very highest level of the United States, with the ability of the department to do a waiver. And so there's flexibility.
So the default would be no.
The default should be no, is my recommendation, which was the Intel Committee's unanimous vote, with the ability of the department, to grant waivers. So there is still flexibility in the idea, but once again, I think the DOE national labs are at the top of the security worries.
I understand. Quick follow-up question. Who is Chinese? There are a lot of Chinese Americans. Are they swept into this? What's the definition?
Yeah, so the way the orders are written is it's citizens.
Chinese citizens?
Citizens.
Okay, so a Chinese American who's been here 50 years or a couple of generations would not be included in this.
Citizens is the way that the order is currently written.
Okay, thank you.
Or Russians, or, I mean, we had an Iranian trying to get hired, like an Iranian citizen, and we had concerns on the type of technology, and we decided not to let them in.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I've taken the gavel just for everybody's information while Senator Lee goes to vote. Let me follow up on that. I don't know the particulars of it, but this, by the way, I've been elsewhere, so if I ask something which is a repeat, I apologize. But I'll pick up where Senator King left off. There was two folks who apparently were American citizens, but who were passing information to the Chinese Communist Party that were recently arrested from the DOD. And I want to say it's out in San Diego. I'm a little vague on all this, but suffice it to say that this occurred. So if the restriction is on Chinese citizens, and by the way, I'm Irish American, right? So I'm not saying we have this kind of prohibition upon Chinese Americans. I'm trying to understand this kind of interface where there's been an infusion of people who now are naturalized U.S. citizens, but in some way still might pose a security risk. And so we want fairness. We want to capitalize upon incredible human talent, but we don't want to be someone's sucker. So take into account these naturalized citizens, and how will we do that as a follow-up to what Senator King asked? In terms of establishing security. Yes, ma'am. Would you like to go?
Yes, so I think that's a really good question. So we have, just to put some data out there, of the Chinese citizenship had graduation. After they've been here for 5 years, 88% have stayed, and after 10 years, 81% have stayed. So some of them a lot of them are going to stay. And the question is, which ones are the ones that you need to be concerned about? So I think what we've done with working with the universities and NSF, and certainly, Paul, with your administration work on this too, is the Department of Energy back in 2019 and then 2021, you have every PI, everyone that wants money, has to put down all their connections, okay? And with regards to money, visits, financial support, all of that has to be there if you're going to get DOE money. And I have been in the SCIF where I've been talking to our intelligence people about someone that may arise that causes them concern. And those people are also working with our vetting, ARTES group, in order to figure out who those people are, because I tell university PIs that if you don't disclose and we find out that something is wrong, you're out of here.
So let me ask you this, though, because I once read about how the Chinese missile program began, because there was a Chinese American who was doing fabulous work, but because of a security issue was not given clearance to continue, and he just wanted an outlet for his intellect, and so he returned to Communist China and helped develop their program. So I guess that brings to mind, is there a way to discern between those people who are more loyal to China and those who are more loyal to the United States, but if we shut off opportunity, they will go where they have opportunity? Do you follow I'm going there?
Cassidy, that's exactly what we've been talking about here, is the concern about all the cuts that are happening in the Department of Energy, 300 employees at NNSA, 1,800 across the department. And those people have an incredible knowledge, scientific background, and if they're just really upset, shall I say, they may decide to do that. So it concerns me that...
Well, people have got to eat, so they got to have a job.
Yeah, you got to pay the mortgage, you got to eat. You can take that contract that letter that I got recently that said $40,000 for an hour's worth of work in China. We'll pay all your expenses. And, for somebody that is mad, is angry at the government, or for...
Well, but that's not actually, that's not my fundamental question, though. I'm going back to this person in the 1940s or 50s who was really seeking opportunity. So is there a way to discern between those who might be a security risk and those who are, they may leave, but they're going to leave because of opportunity or other circumstances, not because of their security risk, fundamentally?
So in the case of the people, again, we go through with the ARTES program and also the risk matrix at the laboratories, we go through as much information as we can that they will give us with regards to when they're employed at the university, or employed in the federal government, to find out whether they could possibly be a risk.
And of course, this would apply to people of multiple nationalities. I think I heard you mention as I walked in, because there's talented people coming to the United States for graduate school from the world over, right?
Yes, but you don't have to only worry about someone that has Chinese background.
I get that.
Americans, scientists that have decided they needed the money, so they went over to China.
I'm a little suspicious about some of the Canadians. Just to put it on it.
I don't know. I think it's Irish Americans we need to worry about.
You don't have to worry about Irish Americans for much. Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all of you for being here. I appreciate this. I grew up in a time back in the 60s where the height of the Cold War, there was a continuing cartoon series in Mad Magazine where it was spy versus spy. And there was a white spy and a black spy, and they were constantly doing tricks with each other in a comical competition. We're way beyond that. And I think, you know, when I was I got a master's in Earth and Environmental Science, and I had a number of foreign students within our program. And it was embryonic in that sense of how much they added from their educational system to things that we didn't emphasize or didn't understand as well, and vice versa. I got a great appreciation for that. I taught field geology for a year down in Costa Rica while I was still a graduate student, and saw that culture and got those exchanges. It's incredibly powerful. I don't think we can look at the number of our largest companies that have been started by immigrants, the amazing innovations and breakthroughs that have come from people that came to this country because they wanted to live in a free country. To be quite honest, that magnet is still very powerful. But I want to ask each of you, I mean, are we doing enough? Is the current system sufficient to protect our classified research from foreign espionage?
So, Senator, I do think, as we've been discussing, I think a heightened level of awareness, because there's been generation after generation of Chinese just adapting and to try to steal. I would make a broadening point to your question, which is not just classified. I mean, the leading renewables lab in the world is in your state. It's not even close, okay? No other country comes close to that. And so just to pick on a topic, perovskites for thin film solar may be the next big thing. We don't want that to be in Xinjiang, produced by coal and slaves, literally slaves, right? Because they're the wrong religion. I thought we were over that in 1945, but the Chinese are doing that. Right. And I'm certain they're trying to steal it from your lab, or your nation's lab.
I view it as my lab.
Yeah. You're in your state. And so I think there's a broadening point. It's not just classified. It includes both also economic impact technologies as well as classified.
Totally agree. Dr. Richmond?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think what we're talking about here is an evolving situation, and it will continue to evolve. So we have to have a system together that's adaptable, can quickly move.
But is our system now sufficient? Is the question, right? We've got to be adaptable. There are all kinds of things we can do to improve it, but
it can always be improved. It can always be improved. But I think certainly under my administration, we took what we got from the past administration, heightened it up even more. And as we go through, we're going to have to look to see how much it needs to be heightened anymore. But again, it's not just classified information. It's also the AI and many of the other areas. Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to foot stomp that. It's beyond, it's more than the classified information, because it's really a lot of the technologies of the future. It's AI, it's biotech, it's the new materials and manufacturing. And so I think what it's really important is to focus on the behavior. And I think that a lot of the new regulations and rules that are being put in place are a start and are beginning to do that. But I think it's going to take time to implement those. And again, I think we'd have to take that really holistic look. And we can't set and forget, right? This is a dynamic, the technology is changing, the vectors, the threat vectors are changing. And so it is going to require a constant dialogue.
The magnitude of those threat vectors has never been greater. And I think we've got to maintain that sense of urgency that you guys all have shown. So I appreciate that. Several of you have talked about foreigners coming into our universities and being more motivated or adding a great deal to innovation. I think we've got to get back also to how do we get our kids in this country. I mean, the reason universities are receiving and open to receiving these foreign students is because we don't have a pipeline that's sufficient to provide the technology and the STEM kids. We got to get to them in elementary school. Do you guys have, you realize you connect that problem and the solution of it with this issue about our national security? Start this side.
That's an excellent point. I mean, STEM education, we should start at K-12. and really do things to support.
K3.
Yes, actually the earlier parts. I mean, because you hear kids by the time they're in middle school, they're
Absolutely.
saying, I can't do math. But that's going to take an effort, and we want to make sure that we draw from the wide swath of Americans from all over the country. And so that starts with, support from the undergraduate and make people understand what the possible is. And also, I want to it's the technically proficient workforce.
Okay. So, do you realize that our country has the lowest retention rate for kids that want to, in the world, for kids that decide they want to be a scientist at 18 and don't end up being a scientist at 24?
I do know that number.
Lowest.
Outrageous.
Senator Justice.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I've said this a bunch of times, but I'm probably a new kid on the block, but I'm not a kid. I've got a lot of white hair, and I've been round and round and round. I can tell you just simply this. I truly believe that energy absolutely is the key to just about every single thing that we've got going. That's all there is to it. Now, and if it's that level of key, I've just got to share with you just a couple things real quick. First of all, we have one of these 17 labs in Morgantown, West Virginia, and we're really proud of that. And I can tell you that I've just gotten through being the governor of the great state of West Virginia for 8 years, and to be perfectly honest, we were able to do lots and lots and lots of good stuff. And little West Virginia, that a lot of people told a lot of bad jokes about, to tell you the truth, along the way, became a diamond in the rough that everybody missed. And with all that being said, successes like you can't imagine. And we were really, really proud of exactly what we did. Now, with that being said, along the way, there was a gentleman that I ran into way, way, way before I ever became governor, and he was a PRC national, and just the most legitimate speaking gentleman that you could ever be around. And then all of a sudden, as I became the governor, we found out things that were going on with him and his life and everything that tied right back to his homeland that absolutely astounded us. I mean, absolutely a gentleman a guy that is suspicious of almost everybody a lot of times, but absolutely trusting in everybody. A guy that believed with all in me that this guy was the real deal. A guy that absolutely we trusted in every way. And we were astounded with what we found. That's all there is to it. Now, if energy is what I think is so important, it's off the chart right now. It's off the chart how important energy is. Do you realize, if you're a business guy, and that's me, do you realize that we can't cut our way out of these messes? We can't. We can mind the store, and we can surely do a lot better. But at the end of the day, we got to find a way to grow. And the way to grow, absolutely, hands down, is energy, period. That's all there is to it. So if it is the most important, and it is, it truly is, then we have got to be on guard, and we've got to do better. Because the world is trying to absolutely discover or steal our innermost secrets all the time, all the time. So with all that being said, I would say to everybody, from the guy that's the white-haired guy from West Virginia that's a business guy, not a politician. I'm a guy that talks to you just with common sense and logic. I would say beware. And absolutely we got to do better. And these folks right here are the key to us doing better in a lot of ways. So I do have one question, and it just parallels everything that I've already said. Because you see, I really believe that President Trump, because I'm a real friend with the family, and I'm proud of that. And absolutely, I am trusting of the family. And he's our president. And he's now saying to all of us, look, we got a problem here. We need to do better. And so let's get at doing better. But my question real fast is just this. And this is to Miss, is it Puglisi? Did I get that halfway close?
Puglisi, yes.
Okay. You know, and my question is just this, is given your expertise in counterintelligence and research security, can you provide insight into the extent of collaboration between DOE national laboratories and the 7 Sons universities in China, please?
Thank you very much. Well, I myself have not done empirical research to be able to give you the exact numbers. There's been a number of articles that look at those kinds of collaborations. And for those who are not aware, 7 Sons are universities that work directly with the military. And so, this is very concerning because, China says that it's civil military fusion. It will use anything that it acquires and apply it to its military. And so those are our affiliations and collaborations that we really need to take a closer look at.
Well, thank you so much. And I know my time has expired, but I would say just this. And I'll do anything and everything I can do to help all of you in every way at any time. We've got to become safer, and we've got to become more protected, in my book. Thank you so much.
I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. This really has been a great hearing. We're going to keep the record open until close of business, 6 p.m. tomorrow, February 21st, for the submission of written questions for the record for our witnesses and items included in the hearing record. Before we gavel out, I want to just correct the record on some things that have been said today. Over the last week, there has been a lot of fairly misleading and poorly sourced reporting regarding dismissals at the U.S. Department of Energy. And here are some facts that I think are relevant and significant, but often omitted. President Trump and the Department of Energy are committed to making government more accountable, efficient, and restoring proper stewardship of the American taxpayer dollar. And the previous administration was not a responsible steward of that, and we're paying the price for it heavily in the form of inflation. In just 4 years, the Biden administration expanded the Department of Energy's federal workforce, and it did so by more than 20%, adding more than 3,000 federal employee positions. In the last year alone, the Biden administration increased the size of the Department of Energy federal workforce with 1,000 new employees. Delivering on President Trump's mandate, supported by more than 77 million American voters, the Energy Department began on Thursday dismissing a portion of recently hired federal employees classified in the federal government as probationary employees. Across the Energy Department, less than 700 probationary employees have been dismissed. These dismissal numbers pale in comparison to the total amount of positions the Biden administration hired over the last 4 years. They're also less than the total positions added by the Biden administration in the last year. Now, contrary to many news reports, the Energy Department's nuclear weapons production plants and nuclear laboratories are exempt from these dismissals, so those aren't part of it. At the Energy Department's Power Marketing Administration, the PMA, fewer than 3% of total employees were dismissed and were primarily administrative roles. Of the more than 70,000 contractors and federal employees at the National Nuclear Security Administration, or NNSA, fewer than 50 employees were dismissed. These employees held primarily administrative and clerical roles. The Energy Department will continue its critical mission of protecting our national security and nuclear deterrence in the development, modernization, and stewardship of America's atomic weapons enterprise, including the peaceful use of nuclear technology and non-proliferation. So it is important that we keep the facts aligned. When people are crying that the sky is falling, it usually is not, and certainly is the case here. In any event, I thank the witnesses for being here today. It's been a good, informative discussion. We've laid a good record, and I very much appreciate your help. The hearing stands adjourned.